Hi, I'm Paul Roberts, and this is Conscious Counseling 101. They say ignorance is bliss. I guess it is, maybe, for some. If you don't get hurt and you find ways to just get by and everything works out okay for you, it's probably better that you're ignorant and enjoying your time and your existence. But if you get hurt, and there's other things you should be considering, but you don't because you're ignorant and blissful, then it could be a bad thing. If it turned out you should be growing and there's a direction or a purpose you could be growing towards, and you don't because you enjoy your ignorance and blissfulness or you're not aware of what else you could be doing, well, then that would be harmful even though you wouldn't know it. And you can't get rid of that harm. It's real, it's legitimate. So I think there is the need for all of us to tell ourselves we really can't afford the luxury of ignorant bliss. I mean, if there's no reason for us to be here other than just marveling at the splendor and wonder of our environment and our life and all of creation and our circumstances that have been given to us, then maybe we should consider the positive benefits of just embracing that and having that be what our life is about. And if there's anything more, then just go ahead and be ignorant to it because that's enough. But what if there's something else that we're not considering? What do we have to do to give ourselves permission to dismiss everything away and be committed to the fact that what we have in front of us is more important than any other life purpose or any other way of being that we haven't considered other than the one that's laid in front of us that we perpetuate? How do we know that giving ourselves the credit, the benefit of the doubt to do that isn't the worst thing that we could do to ourselves? I mean, consider the fact that those that are wealthy and have power and prominence in the world and have a way for that to continue, what are they really trying to do? They're trying to make that continue so that they can continue to have and to ward off unpleasurable things so that they really can be ignorant and blissful and enjoy that which they have. And the only way they venture into non ignorance is to make sure they're maintaining their ability to do that by legislating the systems that others are oppressed and have to subscribe to so that they can continue that. In a way, they're ignorant and blissful because they're not considering that that way that they're subscribing to give themselves what they need might be causing them to not take other pathways toward enlightenment and true life purpose that they would otherwise have. And so what they're doing, even though they're powerful and ruling over many, they're really subjecting themselves to an ultimate ignorance because they want to maintain what they have at the cost of others. For me, I find that I'm past the reasonable ability to allow myself ignorance and blissfulness and even happiness in many regards because since I've made the conscious choice to be aware and to search, I actually have taken on a responsibility for myself that to ever give up once again on that search would be to drop something that I've already proven to myself is a valuable thing to be striving for. And so consequently, I must continue to be conscious and even rise in my consciousness and my ability to understand everything that's going on and why. And I lose the ability to be ignorant. And I want to reach out and help others to lose that ability to be ignorant also, but because they're blissful. They don't see the value, and who can blame them, in what I offer because it's not cushy and comfortable and seemingly rewarding from the outset when it's viewed. It's almost like it's a burden that's not necessary. And they want to remain in their place and not take on that burden. I believe this is part of the reason why more people don't reach out for help, because they're not convinced that what they'd be reaching out for would take them to a place that they're not currently at, that would be better than where they are, because they can't imagine being in that place, and they can't imagine any qualities of value that would come from it enough to get past the pain that having to make the struggle and the search or the reach out or the leaving their blissful ignorance would seem to be worth doing for them. And so consequently, they don't ever make much more than even a first step towards it. And with conscious counseling, I'll talk about how I don't know anything for certain. I just have beliefs, and I'll use perspective shifts to offer myself to look at things from all angles and be glad that I have what is on my plate to consider, even if I know that I would enjoy having joy and blissfulness but can't have it because I've walked away from ignorance. I'll force myself by the knowledge that there could be something else that would force its importance to be considered over and above not considering it and the joy from the ignorance of doing nothing. So, even though I can't know, the infinite possibility of what can't be known has been so compelling to me that I've started on the journey towards that infinite possibility, and I can't go back because the infinite unknown is so much greater than the finite known. And once you click on, it's like you can't ever turn back around. And I equate this to the light, and I equate this to Jesus' teachings, and I equate this to being found versus lost, and I equate this to being on the narrow road that very few will find, because you can't go back. You wouldn't want to go back once you've realized the value of the unknown and the potential it holds and the finite qualities of the knowable. There was a hymn that I remember singing in church, and it was a part of, I forget what the name of the song was, but it said, "The things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace." Well, if his light is about consciousness, and God said, "I am," since the beginning, and Jesus was sent by him to give us his teachings and his ability to understand what he understands, then as we become a part of the light and consciousness, if we would accept it and knock on the door and walk forward, we would be starting on that journey away from ignorance and darkness. But at the same time, if we had any blissfulness or happiness in that ignorance and darkness, we'd be walking away from that, following on that straight and narrow road that leads to the narrow gate that very few will find, and we would be having to bear our cross on that road the entire length of the journey. And there's very little blissfulness in that. There may be times of joy when we see the value of all God created and he said it was good, even though if you look at the Garden in Eden symbology that was written about, we somehow corrupted what should have been good, and we have to live in a cursed place, even though it still consists of the things that were good initially. The way we related to them without intervention from God or Jesus' teaching or something beyond ourselves wouldn't allow us, without that intervention, to govern it properly. We'd need that intervention forever, the rest of our term of life on this planet or other planets we might go to. But the point is, you can't ever have the blissful ignorance again because there's a larger picture that you have to look at that's so much more valuable and complexing and confusing. It's an enigma, but it becomes so much larger, even though it can never be solved or known or answered fully. You can have faith or belief. It's so much larger than just not looking to it and just accepting what you have in ignorance and bliss, that it should ultimately pull you if you wanted to look towards the consciousness or the light. You should ultimately be pulled that way by the sheer limits that not looking would be so debilitating or so limiting. So, ignorance and blissfulness only works if you're so encapsulated in it and you have somehow the luxury that you need to continue having the joy that that state provides you, even if it doesn't happen naturally and you have to make it happen. It's actually a limited thing, a limited means for yourself. And it has to be nurtured by outside factors, allowing you to stay inside of that protected area of ignorance and bliss, no matter what happens outside of it, even if those that are outside of it have to suffer and perish for your joy inside of your. And when you look at the highest commandment that Jesus offered at the Last Supper, of doing unto others the way you'd have done unto yourself, in love and knowledge of his teaching for your brothers and those that are around you like yourself, you see that this is the antithesis of being in a state of all-consuming ignorance and bliss at the expense and suffering of others. And so to reach out for the highest commandment of caring for others, you must walk out of a state of ignorance and blissfulness for your own good and for the good of others around you. And you would do this out of consciousness or acceptance of the Jesus teachings that's offered to you to help you to see that this is more important. And this brings you out of darkness and off of the broad road that most are on that leads to destruction, and would set you ultimately on the straight and narrow road. But because there's just enough ignorance and darkness in this world to provide temporary pleasures that might offset you from the pains that take away, and there's vices and things that can make you numb to make you think, oh, I get enough pleasure that life's worth living. I'd rather have life than worry about what comes after. I want to prolong it. I want to find some way to substantiate what I have, even at the cost of others, but I don't see that because I'm in my closed world of ignorance and bliss. What you're basically doing is you're turning your back on the light. And as I said earlier, you can't turn your back on the light once you've gone even your first step toward the light. Because once you're there and you look back at the limited state that you once had, you realize the deception that you had fed yourself, and you don't ever want to be there again. Now, when you go into the New Testament further beyond the Gospels, and some churches I've attended in my life, they continue to say you're steeped in sin. You can't get past sin. You need perpetual forgiveness from sin. You need perpetual recorrection or rebuking to make sure you're on the straight and narrow. But if you truly knocked and the door was open and you truly went towards the light and you truly went on the straight and narrow path and you bared your cross and you examined where you came from, why would you ever want to go back to that ignorance again? Because now you see it for all that it is, because you've seen from the light. So the question is, why aren't all people that are in churches having this experience? And here's the answer to that. And again, I can't know this, but this is what I believe and I have faith in. The light that's being presented to people is not the real light. It's a fabrication of man to make themselves ever more comforted in their state of ignorance and blissfulness, subservient to the man and the limited means of this earth, by indoctrinating themselves into a system that requires that they continue to serve those that lead them, that have wealth and power and the love of money and the hierarchy that they set up, so that they can continue to keep you in a delusional, ignorant as close as they can to a blissful state. And one of the reasons why we're coming out of that bliss now, and there's so much animosity and division, is because the world is so populated that there aren't enough people that are oppressed to serve those that once had, and they don't want what they once had to be cut off from them. And so they're now manipulating the gears of government forces so that others can continue to be oppressed further, so that they will continue to have and continue to be able to be cushioned and ignorant and blissful and in the dark. And the ironic thing to a believer such as myself is that so many of these types of people claim that God and the Word is showing them this. And that is antithetical to the light that Jesus brought into this world. And yet it's still being manufactured and indoctrinated into people's mindsets and beliefs, and further entrenching and ingraining them into the way that they are, which is in the darkness, even though they're in the church and espousing the word of the Lord and sharing that with fellow supposed believers, all the time pushing down their fellow citizens of the world so that they can maintain that darkness and ignorance and bliss in their lives and justify it the whole time. And we're seeing a division where this cannot happen any longer, because there isn't enough wealth to go around. There isn't enough for everybody to have as the world gets more and more unsustainable and limited in its resources. And there's more and more suffering that comes from human intervention in natural forces and causes and ones they do to themselves. And so everybody goes and looks and points the finger of blame at everybody else. We can recognize this is happening without feeling like we have to do what we're already doing, or be religious, or follow the word or Jesus. Well, amazingly, there are tools given to all of us in all religions in the secular world, such as logic and rational thought, that can help us to combat these things. For instance, right now, we're in the midst of something where if anybody really wanted to compose themselves and take a look with logical or rational thought, they could see that some of the positions being espoused, well, let's just take, for example, by the extreme conservatives and conspiracy theories being spread around by social media and news organizations that seem increasingly compelling, but they're all compelling because you can't know whether what they're talking about is true or not. But there's a lot of people signed up, and it all seems like they're convinced and convicted. And so you start to think about it, and it starts to become viable seeming to you, because enough other people are saying it often enough in enough different ways, and it becomes a false religion or a false prophet in and of itself, almost like a cult. And of course, we don't want to criticize Jesus or God and the Bible, but we don't know those things. We have faith and belief in them. Well, what man makes, or what false prophets can make, can be as compelling seeming. But there's no way to prove them either. And all of a sudden we can have faith in them. But why do we have faith in them? Because they promise to continue our ability to have, at the cost of others, and stay in that state of ignorance and bliss, which, remember, is really the opposite of consciousness and light that Jesus brings. But they still think that's what they're receiving, because there they are worshiping in church. There they are reading the Bible. There they are voting for the candidate that they think delivers on what God says. There they are doing all these things. And until the last days, they'll be surprised when they knock and they're not let into the banquet. How can that happen? Because they didn't know it was happening, and the whole time they thought, oh no, it isn't. It's not happening. It's not happening. But it is. Because your rational thought and all the other tools that you've been given by grace, amazing grace, didn't allow you to truly knock on the door and truly take that step out of your ignorance and bliss to a place of light and consciousness. And because you weren't willing to do that, you didn't get past the guise of man holding you back and keeping you blinded in darkness. And so the promise of God and Jesus' teachings don't even totally get presented accurately to you. And so you cannot openly accept them, even though you think you have, because man's intervention has gotten in your way. I'm doing a study currently of the New Testament past the Gospels, and I'm comparing what I'm hearing to what Jesus himself taught us. And I'm seeing contrasting points of view. And at first I was really hard on Paul. And I thought, well, maybe that's the one source. But then I started looking at Peter and I thought, gosh, there's some contrasting things there too. And then I looked at James and I started realizing, oh my, all of these people have some contrasting ways they write or view things to what Jesus told us. Could it be that the stepping stones to the stumbling blocks are right there in the word itself if we don't leave our state of ignorance and bliss and walk towards that state of enlightenment or light? Could it be that the rest of the time we spend our energies manufacturing and maintaining that state of ignorance and bliss rather than walking on the spiritual path toward light? Could it be that for an entire lifetime we could think we're walking on that path and not be walking on that path? Could it be that we're just living for darkness and the pleasures of life, subduing everyone else and oppressing them to the best of our abilities so that we can have and they won't, living in the antithetical way to the highest commandment that Jesus gives to us the entire time, and not being upfront and honest with ourselves that we're doing that because we feel our bubble will be popped and we won't have what we need and we won't live in ignorance and bliss. Could the glut of social media and conspiracy theories and negative, hateful news networks that only point towards getting people aroused and to join with one another against whatever else because they've got it in their hands. Could this all be what's happening? Even churches and pastors and other religions all pointing towards just whatever it takes. Make it happen here in this physical world for you. There's a way if you choose the right thing and we band together. There's a way that we can make this keep going for us. Is it possible that this is happening and has, in one form or another, under the guise of man's teachings, all the days of life on this planet, especially the last 2,000 years where there's no excuse for it because Jesus' teachings would not foster this approach? Is it possible that this is happening and why? These are the questions I just want you to consider today. Don't listen to me and don't just think in your own vacuum that may contain a decent quotient of ignorance and bliss, but look at a different perspective, a different conscious counseling perspective of the same thing that we're both talking about and looking at here. But look at it from other points of views that you might not naturally look at it from. And see if the words that I'm saying here can't be true and possible. Listen to this again once you've done that and consider again. Give yourself the ability to do what Einstein said. Use imagination, because imagination is more important than supposed knowledge that you may think you have, that's been ingrained in you all the days of your life and all through the leaders of society, all through the years. And you became aware of what you thought you knew. Before you knew, you were learning to think you knew it. And you haven't yet given yourself permission no matter how old and wise and learned you think you are, to look towards the light and leave your limited state of ignorance and bliss behind, going for the unlimited possibility of all things that can't be seen right in front of you and may not provide ignorance and bliss, but could be all more powerful and more important than anything else that you're currently or have been living for all this time. Consider this. This is my offering to you as Conscious Counseling 101 on a daily basis, but in this form here today. I'm Paul Roberts. I wish you the best at considering these things. This is Conscious Counseling 101. And get back to me and tell me your thoughts if you have any on them. And if you'd like to talk more about these or other issues, I try to make myself available because I believe that the help that I offer is so valuable, even though it's rarely ever seen or realized. I believe that I'm willing to offer it for the potential that it could be valuable, the most valuable thing. I stand by waiting.